Sweat dropped as Misty appeared behind Brock with her heavy mallet somehow hoisted above her head. In a fierce downswing that made a loud cracking sound and caused Ash and Giselle to wince, Brock found himself laying flat on the ground with Misty standing over top of him and breathing hard. Give it a rest for one freaking second, Brock. We're all tired, cold and ready for bed, and hearing you daydream about Nurse Joy isn't helping. The pouting teen pulled himself up off the ground and grumbled to himself as Ash shook his head and returned Bulbasaur. Come on guys, let's go. I wanna get there before the Pokémon Center closes for the night. With those words said, the group of traveling trainers made their way back the way they had come through the forest to the road they had been on earlier. Hoping that the path in question would lead them into Saffron a short time after finally finding it again, they continued on their way while trying to put the mysterious events of the evening behind them and out of their minds. XXXXXXXXXXXX. Nearly 20 minutes of walking later found the four Pokémon trainers traversing the expansive, numerous and maze-like streets of Saffron City. The road they followed did indeed end up taking them straight and true to where they wanted to go, and before they knew it, the four of them had finally arrived at their long-awaited destination. Never having been in a city quite as massive and all-encompassing before, Ash, Misty and Brock looked like their heads were on swivels as they looked all around themselves in every direction and took in the sights that seemed to be almost limitless. The towering buildings that stretched high into the sky, the numerous shops, stores and restaurants sprawled out on practically every corner, and the dizzying number of streets and roads were enough to make anyone inexperienced to big city life go nearly boggle-eyed at everything that was practically getting thrust into their faces all at one time. The streets and roads were extensively populated by both pedestrians and vehicles alike, and the sight of so much going on at once caused Ash to whistle and shake his head. Dang, this city is huge. I've never seen any place so big before, not even Verdian City is this big. No kidding, you could get lost here, Misty stated matter-of-factly as she continued to look all around. Brock didn't say much since he was too preoccupied with all the women he was seeing at every turn, but Giselle herself seemed rather nonplussed by everything. Meh, you see one big city and you've seen them all in my opinion, she said simply. Ash looked over at his girlfriend and placed his hands behind his head. Yeah, I forgot that you said you and your family have been here before. How many times? Giselle shrugged. A few. My family has some rather important assets here in the city, so I've been here quite a few times. Mostly when we've went to eat at the Golden Magikarp, but my sister and I have went shopping here a couple of times as well. Misty looked at Giselle curiously for a few moments before saying searchingly, you know, it's kind of strange, Giselle, but I don't recall you ever really mentioning or talking about your family very much. Not even their names. The slightly older girl seemed to stiffen up for a moment and looked away before replying, that's because, it's just a complicated situation. My family has never really been a close one, let's leave it at that. Giselle trailed off then and went silent, and everyone took that as their cue to no longer press the issue. After walking on for some time longer, they came out from another street and turned a corner around a big office building and saw a huge lot across the street from them that had a massive building situated in its center that was stretching high up into the sky. A large sign out front near the entrance to the lot read, Sylph Company, in big bold letters, and was illuminated by two lights built into the frame of the sign post below it. So that's Sylph Company, Brock questioned idly. Whole lot bigger than I pictured it'd be. They supposedly make tons of the things that we use every day throughout the region, Ash commented in response. At least, that's what Professor Oak told me, and from what I've read of them, it's true. Giselle looked slightly uncomfortable as she looked up at the gigantic building and shuffled on her feet nervously. Can we please go now? I'm really tired and anxious to get to the Pokémon Center, you guys. Ash turned to look at Giselle and could tell something wasn't right but didn't press the issue. Instead, he merely nodded and stepped back. Yeah, she's right guys, come on, let's get to the center before it closes. None the wiser to Giselle's plight, Misty and Brock just shrugged and started following Ash as he continued down the street they were on and ventured further into the city. A short time later, after taking a few more streets, getting lost a time or two and finally breaking down to ask a nearby officer Jenny which way it was to the Pokémon Center, something they nearly didn't get to do since Misty had to bodily restrain Brock from lunging at the woman, they finally arrived at their destination and looked upon the impressively sized Pokémon Center situated right in the middle of a large city square. Making their way inside, the four young travelers checked out the equally as sizable lobby and then walked up to the front desk where Nurse Joy was busy tending to her station. Misty taking preemptive action and holding Brock back before he could strike, Ash approached the counter and smiled tiredly before greeting politely, "Hi Nurse Joy, do you have any rooms available tonight?" The kindly pink-haired nurse looked up at Ash from her computer and smiled sweetly. "Why, of course we do. You got here just in time though, we're quickly filling up due to the Pokémon contest taking place the day after tomorrow." Misty appeared visibly confused. "We got here just in time because of that. You mean you don't close for the night?" Joy merely shook her head and gave a slight wave of her hand. "Oh no dear, not this Pokémon Center. Being in a city as big as Saffron, we simply can't afford to close down for a long period of time. We're always getting late-night emergency calls, healing requests from exhausted travelers such as yourselves for their Pokémon and renting out rooms at nearly every hour of the day." She gestured at the inside of the building around them. "You'll find that almost all Pokémon centers located in busy cities like this hardly ever close down. Luckily, Joys such as myself who are in charge of 24/7 centers always have nurse assistants on shift to help us keep up with the workload so we can rest up for the night." One of the Pokémon Center Chanseys suddenly came bouncing up to Joy's side from the backroom behind the counter and the woman patted her Pokémon fondly on the head with a gentle smile on her face. "Chansey really is a great help to have around the center, but even she can't go non-stop. Right Chansey?" "Chansey." The cheerful Pokémon agreed as she threw her arms up in the air and nodded to her companion's words. Ash looked up at the nearby wall clock hanging above the counter and saw that it was almost past midnight. "You must be working here pretty late tonight then Nurse Joy, it's a little over midnight." Joy checked her wristwatch and then turned her smiling face back to Ash. "My shift actually ends here very soon, but I still have time to sign you all in. Is it just the rooms tonight or do you need anything else? A treatment for your Pokémon perhaps, or maybe even to register for the Pokémon contest?" Ash nodded as he and his friends reached for their Pokéballs and then placed them on a cart that Joy had Chansey wheel around to them. After Pikachu hopped aboard the little trolley in preparation for his own R&R, Ash scratched him behind the ears and told his Pokémon goodnight before turning to Nurse Joy again. "None of us are here to register for the Pokémon contest ourselves, but there is someone competing in it that we'd like to support. How much is the fee to get in and watch the contest?" Joy appeared thoughtful for a few moments before replying, "Well, I'm not exactly sure, but it runs in my mind that the price is around 30 credits per person for a general admission and more if you want to get seats closer to the area where the performances take place." Ash nods and then presses on, "We're also here for a few other reasons. Aside from seeing the city, we'd also like to check if they offer any guided tours of the Sylph building before or after I take my gym challenge here." Giselle stiffened up again at the mention of the Sylph building and Ash's desire to see it in more detail, but no one noticed as Joy answered promptly, "You four are in luck. Once every month they do guided tours of some of the more general areas of Sylph Company to the public. Even though you won't get to go to the employee-only, high-security floors of the building, you'll still get to see quite a few of the fascinating lower floors where some appliances and devices we use every day are manufactured right off the line." The bubbly nurse giggled. "I've been on the tour at least 3 times myself." Suddenly, however, her face grew more serious as she looked specifically at Ash. "Obviously, I'm not going to try and discourage you from challenging the Saffron City Pokémon Gym, young man, but I will highly advise you to be careful. The gym leader there is very brutal and not at all merciful to challengers in any way. In fact, it's become almost commonplace for me to get several traveling trainers in here on a regular basis that has had their Pokémon badly injured after battling at that gym." "It's a psychic-type specialized gym, right Nurse Joy?" Misty asked curiously. She nodded. "Yes it is, and Sabrina's Pokémon are highly skilled at what they do. From what I've heard, few trainers ever even get past her first Pokémon, and that alone hasn't happened in quite a long time." Brock, Misty and Giselle shared a glance while Ash simply shrugged modestly. "Well, my Pokémon and I will give it our best shot regardless. Maybe we'll win and maybe we'll lose, but we'll never know unless we try. We're on a quest to conquer every Pokémon gym in the region before the Indigo Conference, and we intend to make it a reality." Joy raised a single eyebrow. "Well, if that's the case then I bet you would probably enjoy challenging the fighting dojo here in the city. It's not an official gym like the Saffron Gym is, but it does host some rather talented fighting types that would offer a good challenge for you. Ash put his forearms on the counter. I think I remember hearing about that at some point. It isn't an official gym because years ago it lost the right to become Saffron's main Pokémon gym in a battle between the former dojo master and the then leader of the Saffron Gym. No one town or city is allowed to host 2 Pokémon gyms at one time by order of league-sanctioned rules, and if there are multiple gyms, only one can offer an official badge. Joy smiled. That's correct, you know your history. While the fighting dojo cannot offer a badge to victorious trainers, they do sometimes offer rare fighting types as prizes instead, but I have no idea when they do that. Ash nodded slowly and then smiled at the woman. Thanks Nurse Joy, we appreciate all the information. Have a good night. The Pinkett nurse waved to the 4 young trainers as Ash and Giselle started heading towards the upstairs portion of the Pokémon Center, with Misty dragging Brock along behind her so he couldn't stay down in the lobby and torment the poor woman. Upon arriving at the hallway that had rooms stretching down on both ends, Ash took custody of Brock with a sigh from Misty and then waved goodnight to both girls before entering the room directly across from their own. Shutting the door behind him, Ash took a moment to take in the 2-bed, 1-bath little room that had a single window at the far end of it before dropping Brock in the middle of the floor, where said squinty-eyed teen commenced to moping miserably over his failure to swoon Nurse Joy. Heading to the bathroom afterwards and taking a nice hot shower after being on the road for so many days, Ash eventually exited the lavatory a short time later once his teeth were brushed and allowed Brock his turn. Dressed in a black t-shirt and shorts, he walked over to the desk near the door where he placed his clothes and pack for the night and reached into the side pocket of his backpack where his X-transceiver was located. Going back over to sit on his bed, he set the internal clock built into the device for 6 in the morning and then got down underneath the covers. Knowing that Brock would turn the light off when he came out of the bathroom, he slowly closed his eyes and let sleep claim him, since he knew that a good night's rest was going to be needed for the busy couple of days ahead of them all. XXXXXXXXXXXXX. The next morning, bright and early, Ash arose practically with the sun once his alarm went off loudly in the still mostly dark room. The alarm jingle itself being a relatively new song that his mother had bought online and downloaded to his X-transceiver before Professor Oak gave it to him for his birthday. A little extra gift as it were from her to him after he had called to ask her about it once he discovered the song on his handy device a short few weeks prior to the current day. Turning off the alarm and thereby silencing the catchy tune of "Gotta Catch 'Em All" by the group so it wouldn't wake Brock, Ash quickly went to the bathroom and readied himself for the day before coming back out and then leaving the room, heading downstairs to the lobby. Not seeing Nurse Joy or anyone else yet upon arriving downstairs, he walked over to the window seats near the front door and sat down to make a call to Professor Oak with his X-transceiver. Flipping the highly advanced little device open, he selected the professor's speed dial number in his contacts and then watched as the all-purpose nav device displayed multiple reception bars coming from a tiny radio tower symbol on the screen to show that the call was being put through. While he waited, Ash sat back against the cool glass window behind him and felt glad for about the 10th time that his mother had decided to set up his phone plan with his X-transceiver through the mobile phone company, Verizon. Not only were they without a doubt unbeatable when it came to where he could and could not get reception, he was even able to get signal when inside of Mt. Moon. But their monthly fees were reasonable, and from what his mother told him when she set up his phone plan, the customer service department were all extremely helpful and very kind. The mobile telephone market may have been relatively new on the scene, but even still, Verizon without a doubt already had a leg up on all of their equally as fledgling competition. Such companies as U-Mobile, Cricketune, Jog and BD&C simply didn't have the towers or cellular technology as of yet to keep up with the rapidly growing Verizon, and from what he and his mother had been told by Amelia Oak, whom had U-Mobile, the service was dreadfully terrible on overcast days. He was broken from his thoughts suddenly by the sound of the connection on the other end of the line picking up, and a few seconds later, the screen flashed to life and showed Professor Oak himself looking at Ash through the small screen. Seeing who it was that had called, the world-renowned Pokémon researcher smiled at his protégé. "Ah, hello Ash, I didn't expect to hear from you so early in the morning." Ash rubbed the back of his head and chuckled. "Yeah, well, I just figured that I'd get a head start on the day, you know. How is everything there, Professor? Are my Pokémon okay?" The older man nodded and looked back into his lab before glancing to the screen again. Everything is doing fine here, Ash, and your Pokémon are as healthy and as strong as ever. Still training every day with each other just as if they were with you. And you know, that actually reminds me of something, young man. Professor Oak's face adopted a stern expression, and even though it made Ash nervous, he could tell the professor was just being humorous by the slight upturn at the sides of his mouth. Serious, yes, but still humorous. The nervousness on Ash's part being because he knew that he'd have to spill the beans on Ghastly and Haunter and tell the professor all about them very soon, if not possibly even right now. Professor Oak was a very curious man, a testament to the field he had been in his entire life practically, and thus, when one of the trainers whom he held such a strong hope for and interest in was holding out on him, the seasoned professional could all but not stand it. Especially when it was someone like Ash, and not just because he had such a strong hand in the boy's upbringing as a trainer either, but also due to the fact that in his very short time of being a Pokémon trainer so far, the young Ketchum had somehow managed to capture some of the most unique and rare Pokémon the wizened professor had seen in his very long career as a Pokémon researcher. For Ash's part, he hadn't been intentionally neglecting to tell Professor Oak about the story behind Ghastly's capture and Haunter himself. He had merely gotten distracted so much lately that he simply hadn't had the time to. Considering there was so much to tell about Ghastly and Haunter in the first place, he had been wanting to wait until he had more time, and it seemed as though now was going to be that time. Rubbing the back of his head, Ash grinned nervously and answered his mentor after a few seconds. Yeah, sorry Professor, I guess I've just been getting a little bit sidetracked is all. Oak crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. Yes, well, I imagine you must have been, especially when it comes to keeping the origins of this particular Pokémon you captured a secret from me. A small smile cracked across his lips at Ash's guilty look. I am merely curious, Ash, no need to feel so nervous or upset. I will admit to being more than a little surprised at seeing a Ghastly, a talking and rather cheeky one at that, to boot, appearing from the teleporter pad here at the lab when you first sent him over to me, but after the initial shock of the matter had passed, my momentary surprise turned into immediate fascination. The intelligent Pokémon researcher shrugged. After all, it's not every day you get to study a powerful talking ghost type belonging to a trainer you sponsor, and call me an opportunist, but I wanted to know more almost as soon as the awe of the moment died down. That Ghastly of yours is quite the chatterbox and more than a bit of a prankster. Ash facepalmed and sighed heavily at the mention of Ghastly having misbehaved while he had been at the lab, but Oak simply smiled nonplussed. However, he was most fascinating, and I soon found myself simply sitting down at my desk while eagerly listening to Ghastly go on and on about its recent adventures with you, its life story, and several other bits of interesting information that I was only too happy to hear. Quite naturally, he didn't tell me everything concerning how you met or how he came to join you, and said that it was a tale he felt best if told from your own perspective. Either way though, all of the intrigue surrounding Ghastly aside, you should be very proud of yourself, Ash. Ghost-type Pokémon can be difficult to find and capture, even for an experienced trainer, so for you to already have added such a Pokémon to your ever-growing team so early on is quite the accomplishment. The professor crossed his arms knowingly again. They are also known for usually having a prankster nature and can be a real challenge to train, but it sounds as though you already have Ghastly on the right track to improving his already impressive skill set and becoming a very strong Pokémon. You have my congratulations once again. Oak chuckled and gave a genuine smile. I truthfully don't understand all of the hesitance in telling me more about Ghastly though, young man. I can't imagine any Pokémon leaving me more shocked or speechless than when you first captured and transferred over that giant Dragonite and Tentacruel of yours. Ash himself gave a small laugh and rubbed the back of his neck again. Well, see, the thing is, Professor, there's sort of more to Ghastly than meets the eye, as you already kind of know, and I wanted to tell you about it more in depth than just a quick summary. And technically, well, there's sort of two of them now. The old professor appeared automatically interested. Oh, so you've captured another ghost type then, I see. My dear boy, you certainly have had some good luck, just like my grandson in that department, haven't you? Please tell me more, I'm fascinated now. Before Ash began telling the professor about Haunter, he smiled at the mention of Gary's progress. Really? So Gary's doing okay for himself then? Professor Oak nodded with a somewhat proud look on his face. Indeed. He already has 5 badges and has captured quite a few Pokémon himself. He doesn't have the ones he keeps here at the lab on a strict training schedule like yours does, though, so to compensate for that, he tries to rotate his Pokémon in and out regularly. Ash nodded and continued to smile at the professor's words. Good professor, I'm glad to hear he's doing so well for himself. Professor Oak's smile slowly disappeared as he sighed. Yes, it is, but I fear all this near instantaneous success is going to go to his head. My grandson has always had an unfortunate problem with ego, and I'm afraid that his belief that he's the best Pokémon trainer out there is going to catch up with him at some point, and when it does, I don't see it being a lesson that Gary will be too eager at all to learn. Ash looked down at his lap and processed the smart professor's words silently. He felt as though he had no room to really comment out of fear of bringing bad karma down on himself or sounding as though he were bragging on what he had accomplished himself so far. After all, he now had more than enough badges to enter the Pokémon League and several Pokémon just like Gary. If he said too much, Ash was honestly afraid of coming across as a braggart. Instead, he simply nodded to the professor's words and then decided to begin telling him all about the story behind Ghastly and his capture. Once he finished telling the tale of Maiden's Peak and everything concerning Ghastly after that to a now very fascinated and intrigued Professor Oak, he decided to go for broke and bring up Haunter. Professor, I sort of captured a new Pokémon while we were in Lavender Town, the one I mentioned a moment ago. Professor Oak waved him on anxiously. Yes, go on, M-boy. Ash sighed and rubbed the back of his head. Well, it's a Haunter. The professor could tell Ash was holding something back and looked at him intently through the computer monitor he was using. That is also very good news, Ash. 2 ghost-type Pokémon in such a short stretch of time, impressive indeed. Though I sense there is something else to this particular matter, am I correct? Ash nodded. Yeah, Professor, it is. Haunter is sort of, well, unique. Really unique. Professor Oak raised an eyebrow. Oh, how unique exactly? Ash sighed again. It's gonna be a bit of a long story, Professor, so get comfortable. Waiting for the professor to comment but not getting one, Ash started the long tale of what happened in Lavender Town and recounted all of the most important details that had occurred during that time of great emotional struggle and peril. The professor just sat in the chair behind his monitor at the lab and listened to Ash as he enthusiastically and energetically recounted his and his friends' grand and heroic ventures in Lavender Town. Dare not he say anything as Ash went on, merely content to live out the young trainer's brave and exciting tales of his most recent experiences through the stories that his surrogate grandson was so excitedly telling at present. Ash made increasingly grand gestures to help tell the tales he was weaving, and his face would routinely contort into different expressions that would help to relay the emotions and feelings he had so vividly experienced in those life-changing moments that he was now so avidly describing in perfect detail. All the while, Professor Oak just listened quietly with a small smile on his face. Feeling nothing but increasing pride and respect for the boy that he saw as a member of his own family as Ash told of how he and his friends had risked everything to save a despondent Pokémon lost to darkness that everyone else had long given up on and left in the shadows of despair. The pure love and adoration Ash held for Pokémon was almost palpable in the stories he was telling, and the aging professor could not help but see the little boy that was always chasing around and playing with Pokémon at his lab years ago right now as Ash went on. He saw the enthusiastic little boy that so diligently listened to everything he told him day in and day out for 5 years in the budding, growing Pokémon trainer currently before him in digital form. The same little boy he had helped Delia care for, feed and even change when he was but an infant long ago. A boy that, as a toddler, would fall asleep in his lap as he read books to him and even recounted some of his own tales of adventure from when he was a Pokémon trainer himself. Stories he would tell while Ash sat on his knee and looked up at him innocently, sucking his thumb with an expression of pure fascination and awe in his eyes every time a particularly fascinating part concerning Pokémon was mentioned. Seeing the caring, pure-hearted, loving Pokémon trainer Ash had become nearly brought a tear to the professor's eye, and in that one moment, while looking at Ash through the monitor, he couldn't help but think sorrowfully to himself, "Richard, you have no idea what you're missing out on right now with your son. You truly helped to create a remarkable young man and budding Pokémon trainer." When Ash finally finished telling his story to the aging professor, the old man smiled and chuckled before replying, "It seems as though you four had quite the adventure indeed. You were also quite lucky to have received some personal instruction from Agatha herself. I've known her for many, many years and she is highly skilled and very adept at what she does. I would take everything she taught you and commit it to memory because it will benefit you well, believe you me. He then leaned back and crossed his fingers. Now as for the issue of Haunter, that in of itself is a very interesting topic indeed. I certainly have never heard of such a Pokémon before, but I have however heard the tales of black fog that come from Lavender Town. Never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that it was a Pokémon though. The best thing I can tell you is that if you get the chance to send it back to the lab, I will do my best in researching it so I that may be able to tell you more. Until then, I'm afraid that I am at just as much of a loss on the subject as you. Ash sighed and nodded. Yeah, I figured as much, Professor. It's no big deal though, I can wait to find out more until later on. I do have another request for you though that I'd like to make if you don't mind. The professor shook his head. Not at all, Ash, please go ahead. The boy readjusted his grip on the X-transceiver before beginning. Well, here's the thing, I don't want to keep traveling with the same Pokémon I am now. Aside from Pikachu, I want to start regularly rotating my Pokémon in and out. I know they train constantly at the lab, which is great, but I want to build bonds with all of them and I can't do that if they aren't with me. After this gym battle here in Saffron is over, I would like to switch my Pokémon out completely. The wise researcher nodded to Ash's words. I would be glad to help you by rotating your Pokémon as often as you need, Ash. I'm glad you thought of it too. Most trainers with a lot of Pokémon only stick with a select few and forget the rest. I'm sure your Pokémon would all be happy to get to share time with you individually. After all, there is no substitution for going out and getting real-life experience. The professor finished with a finger raised in the air. Ash smiled enthusiastically at Oak's approval of his plan and then responded, it's not so much about even just wanting my Pokémon to get stronger by doing this. My main purpose behind it is just getting to bond and grow closer to them all. Professor Oak smiled at his reply. Good choice of words, Ash, very good indeed. Oh, and while we're talking, I thought I should be telling you that your friend Salia should be arriving here within the next few days or so. She stopped to do some sightseeing along the way, so her progress was slightly delayed. Ash's interest perked up. Really? Did she call you or something? Indeed she did, Oak replied. From about a day's travel outside of Cerulean City as a matter of fact. She seemed more than a little nervous to finally get here, but I reassured her and said that any friend of Ash's is welcome here. The raven-haired trainer smiled. Thanks, Professor, I really appreciate what you're doing for her. I think Salia will enjoy this opportunity since it'll keep her close to her old Butterfree. The professor nodded his agreement. I won't mind having a little bit of help here at the lab either, young man. After all, taking care of a ranch full of Pokémon gets tiring as you get older. I definitely don't complain, but it will be a relief to have a little help. Seeing Nurse Joy finally entering the lobby to start her shift for the day, yawning into her hand as she walked behind the counter, Ash looked back down at the screen and waved. I should probably go now, Professor. I wanna get my training and everything else done before the others get up. Thanks again for everything. Oak smiled and waved back. Don't mention it, Ash. I'll be waiting for whenever you decide to swap your Pokémon out. Have a good day and enjoy Saffron City. Ending the call with his mentor, Ash put his device away and headed to the front desk to get his Pokémon back. Speaking with Nurse Joy, it only took her a short time to go back into the medical bay and retrieve his Pokémon, and as soon as all of his Pokéballs were back on his person with Pikachu atop his shoulder, Ash thanked the nurse and then left to train in the workout gymnasium of the Pokémon Center on the other end of the building. When Giselle and Misty came down into the large workout room almost 2 hours later, once they had woken up and readied themselves properly for training, they found Ash doing speed rope counts on one end of the gym while his Pokémon sparred against one another on the other side of it. As soon as he saw them stretching by the entrance a short while later, Ash put the rope back on the rack where it came from and ran over to greet them. Morning, ladies. Sleep well. Sorry about not letting you know I was training earlier, but I figured I'd let you sleep in. Giselle smiled and shook her head. It's okay, Ash. When we got up and went down into the lobby looking for you, Nurse Joy told us where you were. I was actually a little surprised that this center has its own workout room. The others we've been to hasn't had one. Looking around the sizable gym, she commented then in an impressed tone of voice. "This place is nice. Really nice." The sweaty Ketchum smiled and also looked around at the gym. It was about the size of a normal cafeteria and had all the amenities that any commercial gym would have to offer their clientele. Treadmills, free weights, exercise balls, jump ropes, wall-to-wall mirrors, sweat towels, a locker room, spring-loaded wooden floors and even a stretching mat. "Yeah, it is really nice," he agreed with a nod. "I was impressed when I came down here and saw it. The Pokémon like it too." Giselle just nodded in reply while Misty asked from her single-leg stretch position on the ground, "Do we have any idea where we want to go first today, Ash?" The boy stopped and put a hand to his chin in thought. "Well, I didn't really give it a lot of thought, but I was considering maybe going on a tour of Sylph today if you guys don't mind. Soledad's contest isn't until tomorrow, so why not?" Misty shrugged. "Sure, I don't have a problem with it." Giselle on the other looked a little bit uncomfortable before offering own reply, You know what? I've actually already been on the Sylph tour when I've came here to Saffron in the past with my family, so why don't you guys go and I'll maybe go shopping around in the city." Misty turned to the brunette at that moment and looked excited. "Hey, that sounds a lot better than going to see some boring old company. Can I come with you instead?" Giselle smiled, looking slightly relieved at Misty's request. "Sure, that'd be great, just us girls. I like it." Ash looked between them both, having seen Giselle's odd behavior at the mention of Sylph, but chose to remain silent on that particular and just smiled instead. "Sounds like you ladies have a good day planned. I'll just see if Brock wants to go instead, what do you think?" Both girls agreed enthusiastically, and then the three of them commenced to engaging in an intense training session with their Pokémon for the rest of the early morning. Later on at around 10, once everyone had showered and cleaned up, Ash could be found sitting at bench table on the patio outside of the Pokémon Center with Misty and Giselle sitting across from him. The Pokémon were all gathered a short distance away eating breakfast that Ash had prepared while Brock was making food for himself and the others on a small grill near the table. "Yo Brock," Ash called over to his older friend. "How do you feel about going on the tour of Sylph today while Giselle and Misty go shopping?" The teen looked over his shoulder after flipping over the eggs he was cooking and nodded. "Sure Ash, sounds like a plan to me." Ash gave a thumbs up and then sat back in his seat, patting his chest in comfort before he had to turn and face Misty, who got his attention. "Do you have any idea who you want to use for those 2 gym battles you want to take on while we're here, Ash?" The young trainer crossed his arms and thought for a few moments before answering. "Well, for the psychic-type gym, I'm planning on Ghastly definitely. Hunter's not even an option right now until it learns to control its power better, Pikachu, and then maybe Charmander. After that, I might swap all of my Pokémon out except for Pikachu for an entirely new lineup. Or I'll wait to do that until after we leave the city. I'm still trying to decide." Giselle seemed to understand the reasoning for it right away as she offered with certainty, "You want to give all of your Pokémon a chance to get battle experience instead of just keeping the same 6-head lineup all the time, don't you?" He nodded and smiled at her. "Exactly. That, and I want to get a chance to bond with them all. I was thinking about Primeape for one, and then maybe one of my Gyarados, Fearow, Paris, and then Weepinbell." Brock spoke up over his shoulder, "An electric, bug, water, flying, grass and fighting type team, sounds like a good lineup to me." Ash simply shrugged. "That's the general idea. I want to have a well-rounded team but also get a chance to bond with them all. What better way than that?" The rest of the morning after that was spent with Ash and the others eating, conversing lightly about the day planned ahead, and then cleaning up after themselves before returning their Pokémon and going on their separate ways with a parting farewell. Misty and Giselle heading off into the city for some sightseeing and shopping, mostly, while he and Brock traveled to the Sylph building. Upon arriving at their destination around noon, the 2 boys stared up at the large building towering above them before walking into the lobby. As they entered, Ash and Brock were immediately impressed by the professional, pristine and slightly futuristic appearance of the lobby itself. There was a big fountain in the middle of the room, multiple chairs and other seating arrangements lined up on the sides of the ground floor, colorful floral pieces placed here and there, 2 receptionist counters on either end of the lobby and 2 elevators situated at the far back wall. Looking ahead, they could already see a small group of people gathered in the center of the lobby, most likely for the tour, and they shared a glance with one another before walking over to the receptionist desk on the right side nearest to them. Coming to stand before a curly black-haired woman wearing a white and silver receptionist suit with an earpiece in her right ear, Ash quickly spoke politely to her before Brock could have a chance to perv on the poor woman. "Excuse me miss, we're here for the tour of the building. Have we missed our chance to sign up for it?" The lady looked down at Ash and smiled. "No sir, the tour begins in about 15 minutes, so if you take a seat in one of the lounge chairs here in the lobby, we'll call you up when it's time." Ash smiled to the receptionist in thanks and then went to take a seat with Brock at a circular chair arrangement located around a coffee table a short ways away from the woman's desk. While they sat and talked idly amongst themselves about different topics to whittle the time away, Misty and Giselle were having their own one-on-one time together quite some ways away on another side of the city. Inside a large department store known as Saffrosian Sales, the two young women were currently going from place to place within the large store while browsing through the extensive display of merchandise with excitable interest. "Ooh Misty, look at this!" Giselle exclaimed happily as she held up a cute white top with frilly patterns around the neck. "Isn't this beautiful?" Misty took a glance from where she was standing near some other clothes a short distance away and shrugged. "Yeah I guess, but it'd look better in blue if you ask me." Giselle took another look at the top and sighed. "Maybe, then again we can't buy much as it is, I don't have much room to carry anything else while on the road." "I don't know about you." Misty gave a small laugh. "Makes me wonder why we even came shopping today." She then became a little more serious. "So are you and Ash still going out together sometime this week for your birthday while we're here?" The brunette nodded. "Yes, that hasn't changed. I know he felt bad that we didn't get to really celebrate my birthday properly a few weeks ago due to all the traveling we've been doing, but he insisted that while we were here in Saffron, we do it right and spend some time together." A bright smile suffused her face then. "Which I was only too happy for." Misty merely rolled her eyes. "Good for you, try not to explode." Once the two of them were done in the store, they left and started walking down one of the many streets towards another outlet. However, just as they rounded a corner, Misty collided with someone and stumbled back until she nearly fell to her butt. "Oh, I'm sorry, I should have watched where I was going," she said apologetically as she looked up at the person she had run into. "Yeah well, low credit trash like yourself shouldn't even be walking on the same block as people such as myself anyway," replied the other individual. A rather snooty-looking blonde girl wearing fancy clothes who was in a posse of about 4 other equally as ritzy, stuck-up-looking girls. Misty, given her already rather delicate temperament, glared at the girl who appeared to be around her and Giselle's age and fired back. "Yeah, well maybe if you didn't walk around with your nose stuck so high up in the air that it made you look like a disfigured swanna then you would have seen me first." The other girl looked offended at Misty's rebuttal but managed to regain her composure as she sneered and responded back, "Oh isn't that cute? Some obviously poor little country hick tomboy trying to pretend like she fits into city life. Where did you get those clothes and that hairstyle from? The farm boy next door and his mother who gives cheap haircuts when she's not churning butter." Misty turned red at the other girl's harsh comment, and that's when Giselle became angry and stepped in. "Hey, what gives you the right to talk down to her like that? You think you're so much better just because your mommy and daddy most likely has a lot of money and you live more comfortably than most do." One of the girls standing next to the blonde, a brunette with brown eyes who was dressed just as fancily, pointed at Giselle. "Well, you certainly look like one to talk. Look at how you're dressed, you obviously have some style and sense of taste about you. What could you possibly be doing hanging around with a low-class nobody as this orange-headed hick?" Giselle rounded on her, but before she could say anything, the blonde girl spoke to her posse at large with a smirk upon her face. "Don't let the way she's dressed fool you ladies. She's probably just as poor and tasteless as her loser friend over there, but they decided to steal some nice clothes from a local secondhand store just to come out on the town and pretend to be something they're not." Misty stepped forward and raised her fist. "Why don't you shut your collagen-filled, herpes-infested mouth before I shut it for you? High-rise little hooker." Giselle quickly grabbed onto Misty in order to keep the aggressive redhead from jumping the other girl just as the blonde's face contorted into one of anger at Misty's last rebuke. "Well, if you want to talk big and mess with your superiors like the brain-dead poor trash you are, why don't we settle this with a Pokémon battle? 2 on 2. The brunette beside her chimed in with a voice that was just as high-pitched and irritating as their collective sense of superiority. That is considering of course you even have any Pokémon to battle with. Unless you're too stupid to know what a Pokéball is, let alone how to use one. The other girls all laughed as Misty and even Giselle both saw red. You're on. Misty immediately agreed. Count me in too. Giselle consented just as readily. Misty walked up to the blonde girl and glared at her. You name the time and place and we'll be there. The blonde girl simply smirked again before turning around and waving back at them to follow her. The park is near here, let's settle this there. Giselle and Misty shared a glance with each other and nodded before glaring after the retreating prissy girls and following behind them. Hell-bent on teaching the snobbish rich kids a lesson about spitting on people who were less fortunate than them. XXXXXXXXXXXXXX. Back in the Sylph Company lobby, Ash and Brock were approached by the front desk attendant they talked to earlier who smiled at them kindly before speaking. Excuse me you two, but we now have everyone in attendance that we believe will be showing up for this tour and are ready to begin. Ash and Brock both got up and then looked over towards the elevator to see a crowd of normal-looking tourists all gathered together as they chatted amicably among themselves and snapped pictures of the lobby on their cameras. All save for one that is however, which was a man dressed in a long beige trench coat with a hat on his head. Ash narrowed his eyes suspiciously as soon as he saw the aforementioned suspicious-looking man and then shared a look with Brock, who seemed to be thinking the same thing. They both knew what that one rocket grunt on the Saint Anne had told Ash before the ship sunk about their plans to attack Sylph Company at some point, and with a mysterious, mostly concealed man going on the tour through the lower parts of the building, neither young man had any trust for him. Putting their concerns aside for now though, they made their way to the back of the tour group and waited for a short time before the elevator doors opened up and out stepped a blonde-haired woman wearing the Sylph employee outfit just like the front desk girl had on, with her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Coming to stand before the tour group, she smiled and spoke kindly. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah and I will be your guide today. I hope all of you enjoy the wondrous sights and spectacles awaiting you on this tour as I show you some of the lower level floors here in Sylph Company. Today you will be getting a first-hand glimpse at what goes into making several of the things this company produces that you use every day, as well as several other items and devices you had no idea we manufactured. You might even get to see a few things still in production that have not been released to the general public yet. How exciting, right? Brock and Ash merely exchanged amused glances at the woman's over-exuberance before getting into a line behind the rather small tour group and filling into the elevator. Floor 1, here we come. The lady said cheerily as she pressed a button and the doors closed, lifting them all up to the next level where the doors opened again to reveal a large factory-like assembly line. A truly massive production floor that showed several objects of varying types and sizes that were being carried and transported from one conveyor belt to the next, from machine to machine, all across the massive floor. An operation which was wholly run and maintained by several employees scattered all across the line whom had many different jobs and responsibilities to keep things working smoothly. Stepping out onto the catwalk, the tour guide turned and gestured to the assembly line before them. This floor is where all of the general products and items, mostly household and otherwise, are manufactured, packaged and handled that Sylph Company produces. Ash and Brock's gaze wandered around as she continued. Everything from home appliances, gardening tools, simple electronic devices and automotive parts are all made right here before your very eyes. Our hard-working, diligent and highly efficient production specialists keep these machines working and running at full capacity almost 24/7, every day and all day. Sure does make you respect the things you take for granted on a daily basis, right? The other members of the tour all took pictures except for Brock, Ash and the mysterious trenchcoat man, whom was standing in the very back with no way to tell his facial expression due to the hat and high collar coat he was wearing, of which still made Ash feel nervous and on edge for some reason. Once all of that was done and the tour guide finished explaining the operation of the manufacturing facility, everyone filed back into the elevator and continued on. The next 3 floors were rather uninteresting to say the least. Floor 2 was a customer service and consumer help desk office floor with several cubicles all blocked off from one another in perfectly spaced rows all throughout the entire floor. Everything and everyone in the entire office space looking just as generic and bland as the next. The third floor was mostly just another office space where the accountants, business handlers and financial staff resided, and the fourth floor was a little bit different. While still an office floor essentially, it was a place in which the company graphic designers, tech specialists and communication analyses experts did their daily work in improving the technical as well as communicational aspects of the company and all products released by them. In simple terms, it was a tech nerds paradise through and through, as Ash and Brock quietly chuckled about amongst themselves. The fifth level became slightly more interesting as it was revealed to be a testing and troubleshooting floor where specially trained employees would test, document and attempt to find and fix issues with most all products made by Sylph Company. Except for the more technologically advanced issues, which of course were then forwarded straight down to the fourth floor where the tech specialists operated out of. Floor 6 was a level of the building in which was entirely dedicated to products produced solely for Pokémon and the many Pokémarts that Sylph Company supplied to Encanto and the Orange Islands and even all the way into Johto. This particular floor was also like an assembly line but smaller and in a much less industrialized setting. The employees on this floor also had very particular training in their given field which separated them from their coworkers who worked on the lower levels of the building. One such conveyor line allowed everyone to see Pokeballs of all different types getting pumped out across the belt. Such as standard Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls and even a few other miscellaneous types of balls. A sight in which everyone was fascinated by, especially the strange man in the back. A fact Ash took notice of and watched him closely for out of the corner of his eye. The seventh and subsequently final floor they went to was the Medical and Pharmaceutical Science Laboratory. A place in which all of the scientists working for Sylph Company specializing in medicinal sciences worked at. Stepping out of the elevator and looking around in slight awe at the large, futuristic lab setting filled with people in white lab coats and medical masks over their faces, Ash and Brock's attention was only diverted by their tour guide as she spoke again. This is the floor where our in-house team of very knowledgeable medical scientists work on finding new breakthrough cures for both people and Pokémon, as well as reproducing all of the many incredible medicinal remedies that you can already find in stores and Pokémarts everywhere. She then gestured to two subdivided areas of the large lab which were separated by a thick glass wall. Given of course that we can't have an accidental mixing of the several different varieties of medicines we make, the plexiglass barrier you see separates both sides of the lab into the human and Pokémon pharmaceutical research divisions. The scientists working in these two departments are also specialists in their individual fields and never cross over into either side. She then claps her hands together and smiles. That's all for the tour if no one has any questions. The next few floors are entirely restricted to any but specific clearance level employees, and the 8th floor above especially is the second and much more restricted research floor of Sylph Company, which houses a team of top-grade scientists who spend every day creating and designing some of the most advanced and top-secret new products that you may hear being advertised at any day now. It was at that point, at the very end of the tour, when Ash saw the mysterious man in the trench coat show the first signs of real life that he had seen from him yet. The man stepped forward at the woman's last few words, and it was in that moment that Ash feared he was truly looking at an undercover rocket agent who was about to make some kind of a move. Tensing in preparation to do something just in case the man actually did anything criminal, Ash felt that time was upon them as the strange individual finally made a move and lunged forward. However, to Ash and everyone else's near jaw-dropping, wide-eyed shock, the man who appeared to potentially be a dangerous criminal about to commit some unspeakable act of terror did something that no one was suspecting. Like some weird movie on TV, the man threw his hat off and then ripped his trench coat away, revealing that beneath it he was completely and totally naked. Whilst everyone watched on still in obvious shock, the now nude stranger took off running towards the plexiglass barrier that separated them from the laboratory where the scientists were busy at work. His hands were swinging above his head wildly as he ran, while the quite clearly insane man voiced some sort of ear-piercing, wailing scream that sounded nothing short of lunacy at its most manic. Almost like a cross between a crazed laugh and an animalistic shout all at once. Fortunately, the female tour guide regained her senses fast enough to press the communicator switch just below her right earpiece as she spoke urgently, "We need security on level 7 right away." At the same time, the naked lunatic slammed himself up against the glass and began beating on the transparent wall while grinding himself up against it in some strange form of obscene dance. The scientists on the other side of the soundproof barrier had all stopped what they were doing by now and were just looking on in varying degrees of shock and disbelief, and even slight fear, as the maniac continued beating himself against the wall while ceaselessly screaming. Recovering from his own shock and realizing something needed to be done, Ash shared a glance with Brock, who nodded in return to the unspoken question. Looking up at his shoulder to Pikachu, who was watching the man in confusion with one ear tilted to the side, Ash pointed at him and commanded, "Pikachu, we need to stop that weirdo. Use a low-powered thunderbolt." The electric type looked down at his trainer for just a moment as if to process the command in that moment of unwarranted insanity, but he finally registered what was asked of him before nodding and then jumping down on the floor. With a loud cry of, "Chew!" he released a moderately sized bolt of lightning at the naked man, which struck him and lit up the streaker like a Christmas tree before dropping him to the ground mere moments later. Singed, twitching and out cold. Not even a minute later, one of the side doors opened across from the elevator at the far side of the room and a group of self-uniformed security guards came rushing in towards the downed man. Ash and Brock watched as they immediately cuffed the unconscious lunatic before lifting him to his feet and carrying him back out the door they just came from without so much as a word to anybody. Several moments of silence passed by afterwards, which was only broken by the tour guide coughing and then speaking in her professional, cheery voice once again. "Well, that was interesting to say the least. I hope everyone is okay and I sincerely apologize for that man's actions. I can personally guarantee you that he will be held for questioning by our security professionals before getting turned over to the police immediately thereafter and will be absolutely no further threat to anyone present on this tour." One man spoke up from the group then in a slightly unnerved voice, "Does this happen often, miss?" She shook her head at the question and responded in a very sure tone, "No sir, I can assure you that this is not a regular occurrence. Today was just an unfortunate fluke of extreme randomness that took myself just as much by surprise as all of you. However, as you saw, our security staff is always ever present to put down any possible threat or intruder should the occasion present itself at any time." Her words seemingly placating the rest of the tour group, Ash took that moment to speak up. "Excuse me ma'am, I noticed that security guards came in a different way than we did. I assume there are obviously other ways to traverse the building aside from the elevators." The woman looked back at the boy who effectively stopped the crazed nudist and smiled. "That is correct, young man. As you can see, Sylph Company is a very large building, and while the use of elevators is quite naturally the easiest way to get around and the only thing we use for the tours we offer, there are many other ways in which one can get around." The lady then gestured at the door in which the security guards emerged from. "All throughout the building there are a multitude of stairwells, hallways, side corridors and other secret means of access routes that gets the employees of Sylph Company to whatever floor they need to be at on a daily basis. In all truth, without the elevators, this building is a veritable maze that sometimes takes several months for each employee to adequately learn how to navigate." Ash nodded pensively and took everything she said into his brain, where he memorized what he had just learned of the internal workings of Sylph Company as best as he could. After that was over, the tour specialist led everyone back down into the lobby via the elevator, where after thanking them all for coming, she pulled Ash to the side for a moment. "Young man, I just wanted to say thank you for the part you played in helping to subdue that man earlier on. You and your Pokemon's courage was definitely appreciated today, and the president of Sylph Company will be informed of your kind deed." Ash just smiled and shrugged. "Thanks miss, but it was no big deal. Pikachu was the real hero anyway." Said electric type just rubbed the back of his head and smiled. "Hi Pikachu." Offering Ash another thank you, the tour guide wished he and Brock a good day and then disappeared back into the elevator while the two of them made their way out of the building behind the rest of the tour group. "Well," Ash started as he and Brock walked down the sidewalk leading out of the building. "That was cool, don't you think?" Brock simply nodded and replied, "Yeah, and we learned a lot about how the Pokémon stuff we use every day is made. A lot sure goes into it that I think people kind of take for granted if they don't get to see how it's done firsthand, so I'm pretty thankful for the chance to learn." His eyes became hearts then as he clapped his hands together and smiled goofily. "And that tour guide was so awesomely beautiful. I think I'm in love." Ash just sighed and shook his head. "Come on ya wacko, let's get back to the Pokémon Center so we can be there whenever Misty and Giselle show up." As the two boys walked away from the building, however, neither one noticed one of the nondescript men from the tour who